There is a moment in relationships where confusion stops being romantic and starts being expensive. Not financially, but emotionally. It costs you peace. It costs you clarity. It costs you time you don't get back. And what most people miss is this. Avoidant behavior doesn't always look like rejection. Sometimes, it looks like consistency without direction, presence without definition, closeness without certainty. But here is a deeper truth that changes everything. Someone who is ready for love does not struggle to define it. So the question becomes, not, do they like me, but can they meet me in truth? Because truth doesn't hide behind delay. It answers, and there are 4 questions that expose everything you need to know. Not because they are aggressive, but because they are honest. And honesty is where avoidance collapses. The first question is simple, but it cuts through illusion. What are you actually looking for with me? Notice what happens here. A grounded person may pause, think, and respond with clarity, even if the answer is uncertain. But an avoidant pattern often reaches for comfort phrases, like, let's just see, or, I don't want labels. And that sounds relaxed, until you realize your heart is being asked to live without direction. Because clarity is not pressure. Clarity is respect. The second question goes deeper. Do you see this moving forward, or staying exactly as it is? This question removes fantasy. It forces reality to speak. Avoidance thrives in motion without meaning. Something that keeps going, but never arrives anywhere. But a relationship that cannot imagine a future is already living its conclusion, just slowly. And if someone cannot answer direction, they are already answering you without words. The third question is where emotional truth begins to surface. When things get closer between us, do you feel open, or do you feel like pulling away? This is not about accusation. It is about awareness, because avoidant patterns are not exposed in easy moments. They are exposed in intimacy. When connection deepens, the reflex is either expansion or retreat. And if someone consistently retreats when things get real, then you are not dealing with confusion. You are dealing with a pattern. The fourth question is the most revealing of all. Are you willing to show up consistently, even when it feels emotionally uncomfortable? Because love is not tested in attraction. It is tested in discomfort. Anyone can be present when it feels light, easy, and undefined. But consistency is what separates interest from intention. And intention is what builds safety. If someone cannot commit to emotional consistency, they are not choosing against you. They are revealing what they are not yet able to hold within themselves. And here is where wisdom enters. Because these questions are not designed to trap anyone. They are designed to liberate you. Liberate you from guessing. Liberate you from overanalyzing silence. Liberate you from turning confusion into hope. You see, emotional availability is not proven in how strongly someone feels in the moment. It is proven in how clearly they can stand in truth when truth is uncomfortable. And if someone avoids these questions, that is also an answer. Not a complicated one, a simple one. It means you are asking for clarity from someone who benefits from ambiguity. And that dynamic always ends the same way. One person waiting, and the other staying undefined. But life does not reward those who wait endlessly in uncertainty. It rewards those who choose clarity, even when clarity requires letting go. Because the right connection does not fear definition. It steps toward it. And when someone is right for you, you will not need to decode them. You will not need to chase answers hidden in silence. You will simply ask, and they will meet you there. That is how you know, not by intensity, not by chemistry, but by truth. Avoidant individuals often struggle with emotional clarity, because at their core, they have learned to associate vulnerability with a loss of control, rather than a pathway to connection. This pattern usually doesn't begin in adulthood. It is shaped over time through experiences where emotional expression was either ignored, minimized, or met with discomfort. So instead of learning that feelings can be safely shared and received, they learn something very different, that emotions should be managed internally, contained, and often hidden. When such a person enters a relationship, they are not necessarily disconnected from emotion. In fact, They can feel deeply. But the problem is not the absence of feeling. It is the discomfort of expressing it in a way that creates dependency, expectation, or perceived pressure. To them, clarity feels like a contract they are not ready to sign, even when they are emotionally invested. So instead of saying what they feel in simple, direct language, they begin to operate in ambiguity. They may express affection in moments, withdraw in others, and resist defining what those moments mean. This creates a confusing dynamic for the other person, because emotional presence appears inconsistent. One day there is warmth, attention, and closeness. Another day there is distance and silence. From the outside, this looks like mixed signals. But internally, it is often a protective strategy, an attempt to stay connected without feeling emotionally exposed or confined. What makes this especially difficult is that avoidant individuals often mistake emotional clarity for emotional pressure. If asked direct questions about feelings or intentions, they may feel an internal resistance, not because they do not know, but because stating it out loud makes it real, and what is real feels binding. So they default to phrases that keep options open. I'm not sure, let's see where it goes, or I'm just going with the flow. But emotional maturity is not measured by how well someone avoids discomfort. It is measured by their ability to remain present within it. True connection requires the willingness to sit with emotional truth without immediately escaping into distance or ambiguity. Without this ability, relationships remain in a suspended state, neither fully formed nor fully released. And for the person on the receiving end, this becomes a space of constant interpretation, where silence is analyzed and inconsistency is rationalized. Over time, this creates emotional fatigue, because clarity is always just out of reach. When avoidant individuals are asked direct questions about the future, what often becomes visible is not a lack of intelligence or awareness, but a discomfort with emotional accountability. The future, in this context, is not just about planning, it is about implication. To speak clearly about where something is going is to accept that words create responsibility, and responsibility feels heavy when someone has built their emotional safety around independence and distance. So instead of offering a grounded answer, they tend to shift into language that keeps the moment open-ended. They may say things like, I'm not really thinking that far ahead, or I just want to take things day by day. On the surface, this can sound mature, even relaxed, but underneath it is often a protective mechanism designed to prevent emotional obligation from forming too quickly. The key misunderstanding here is that this behavior is not always rooted in deception. In many cases, they are not trying to mislead anyone. They are trying to protect their internal sense of freedom while still experiencing connection. The challenge is that connection without direction eventually creates confusion for the kinds, because emotional investment naturally seeks clarity over time. When a future-oriented question is asked, it forces a moment of internal confrontation. It asks them to translate feelings into definition. And for someone with avoidant tendencies, definition can feel like confinement. If they say, yes, I see a future, they feel the weight of expectation. If they say no, they risk loss. So they choose the middle space, uncertainty. Not because it is truthful in a fully conscious sense, but because it feels safest emotionally. However, emotional safety built on ambiguity is not stable. It is temporary. It allows them to stay close without fully stepping in, but it also keeps the relationship in a suspended state where growth is limited. The relationship may continue, conversations may flow, and moments of intimacy may happen, but the absence of direction creates an invisible ceiling that neither person can fully break through. For the person asking the question, this moment becomes deeply revealing, because clarity is not just about the answer itself. It is about the capacity behind the answer. Someone who is emotionally available may not have a perfect plan for the future, but they will still be able to engage with the question honestly, without evasion or avoidance. And this is where the distinction becomes important. The issue is not uncertainty about life. Everyone has uncertainty. The issue is the consistent resistance to engaging with emotional direction at all. Over time, this pattern shows that the relationship is being experienced in the present moment only, without the willingness to integrate it into a shared future vision. Their silence is often misread as confusion, indecision, or even emotional depth that is still processing. But in many avoidant patterns, silence is not confusion at all. It is a strategy. It is a way of staying emotionally protected while still remaining loosely connected. Instead of expressing what feels uncomfortable, unclear, or too intense, silence becomes the bridge between involvement and withdrawal. When emotions rise in a relationship, especially in moments of expectation or intimacy, avoidant individuals may feel an internal pressure that they cannot easily regulate. Speaking would require them to define something, to take a position, or to reveal a level of emotional truth that feels exposing. So rather than risk that exposure, they retreat into silence. It is not always a dramatic exit. Sometimes it is subtle, delayed responses, vague answers, emotional unavailability, disguised as being busy, or simply not engaging with important conversations at all. To the other person, this silence often creates a psychological vacuum, and the human mind naturally tries to fill that vacuum with meaning. Maybe they need space. Maybe they are thinking. Maybe I said too much. But over time, this guessing becomes exhausting, because silence does not provide data. It only provides uncertainty. And uncertainty, when prolonged, begins to feel like emotional instability. The deeper truth is that silence in avoidant behavior is often about avoiding emotional accountability. Accountability does not mean blame. It means the willingness to engage, respond, and clarify one's inner world. For someone who has learned that emotional expression leads to discomfort, confrontation, or perceived loss of control, silence becomes the safest alternative. It allows them to remain in the relationship without being fully emotionally present within it. But what makes this dynamic particularly powerful and painful is that silence can still coexist with attachment. They may care, they may think about the person, they may even feel emotional intensity. Yet when it comes time to express, to clarify, or to confront something difficult, they step back into quiet. This creates a confusing duality: presence without communication, closeness without clarity. Over time, this pattern can train the other person to become overly sensitive to silence, reading meaning into every gap, every delay, every unanswered message. The relationship becomes less about what is said and more about what is withheld. And that is where emotional fatigue begins to set in, not because of lack of love, but because of lack of clarity. Ultimately, silence reveals something important: not always absence of feeling, but absence of willingness to engage with emotional truth in real time. And without engagement, connection cannot evolve. It can only pause repeatedly in moments of unspoken tension. Avoidant individuals often prefer to keep relationships in a temporary space, because permanence introduces emotional weight that they feel unprepared to carry. When something is labeled, defined, or clearly structured, it begins to come with expectations. Expectations of consistency, emotional presence, communication, and responsibility. And for someone who has learned to equate emotional closeness with pressure, that structure can feel overwhelming, even if they genuinely care about the person in front of them. So instead of stepping into clarity, they maintain a kind of relational in-between. It is not fully casual, but it is not fully committed either. It exists in a flexible zone where connection is allowed, but definition is delayed. This allows them to experience intimacy in doses while still preserving a sense of independence and emotional escape routes if things feel too intense. What makes this dynamic difficult is that it often feels like progress. There are moments of closeness, affection, shared experiences, and even emotional vulnerability. These moments can create the impression that the relationship is deepening naturally. But without definition, there is no anchor. And without an anchor, emotional direction remains uncertain. The relationship can feel real in moments, but unstable over time. Keeping things undefined also allows avoidant individuals to avoid the internal discomfort that comes with responsibility. If nothing is clearly defined, then nothing has to be fully maintained. There is no formal expectation to show up in a consistent way, no clear standard of emotional engagement that must be met. This creates a psychological loophole where connection can exist without obligation. But for the other person, this lack of definition creates a slow emotional drift. When there is no clear label or shared understanding of what the relationship is, every interaction becomes open to interpretation. Small gestures are analyzed. Inconsistencies are rationalized. Hope fills the gaps that clarity should occupy. And over time, this creates emotional instability because the foundation of the connection is not solid, it is shifting. The deeper issue is not that avoidant individuals do not value connection. Many do. The issue is that defining connection feels like locking in a future they are not sure they can emotionally sustain. So they keep things fluid, believing that flexibility equals safety. But emotional safety without clarity is fragile. It protects in the short term, but creates confusion in the long term. This temporary space often continues until one person eventually asks for definition. And that moment becomes a turning point, because it forces the relationship to either step into clarity or reveal that it was never designed to fully stabilize. The right questions don't force commitment, because they are not designed to pressure someone into becoming something they are not ready to be. Instead, they reveal whether clarity, honesty, and emotional presence already exist within them. There is a subtle but powerful difference between pushing someone into a response and simply exposing what is already true. One creates resistance, the other reveals reality. When you ask the right kind of question, especially in emotionally uncertain dynamics, you are not trying to control the outcome. You are observing the capacity of the person in front of you. Capacity is everything, because someone can feel strongly about you, enjoy your presence, and still lack the ability to engage with emotional truth in a stable way. Feelings alone are not the measure of readiness. Response to truth is. Avoidant dynamics often survive in ambiguity, because nothing is required to be clearly stated. But when a grounded, direct question enters the space, it interrupts that pattern. It removes the comfort of vagueness and brings emotional reality into focus. And what becomes visible in that moment is not just what they say, but how they handle being asked at all. Do they engage with the question sincerely, or do they shift away from it? Do they reflect, or do they deflect? This is why the right questions are not about getting the perfect answer. They are about observing emotional tolerance. Can the person stay present when clarity is required? Can they hold a conversation that involves emotional depth without retreating into avoidance, humor, distraction, or delay? These reactions matter more than carefully crafted words, because they reveal patterns that words can sometimes hide. A person who is emotionally available may not always have certainty, but they will have honesty. They will be able to say, "I am not sure where this is going, but I am willing to be honest about what I feel right now." That level of presence is different from avoidance, where uncertainty becomes a shield rather than a shared truth. The power of these questions is that they shift the dynamic from guessing to observing. Instead of trying to interpret mixed signals, you begin to see how someone handles emotional clarity in real time, and that changes everything. Because clarity is no longer something you chase, it becomes something you test for. Ultimately, the right question does not trap anyone. It simply illuminates whether two people are operating on the same emotional frequency. And when they are not, the truth surfaces, not through arguments or explanations, but through the simple inability to meet honesty with honesty. Emotional availability is often misunderstood as intensity, affection, or even the ability to say the right words in the right moment. But real emotional availability is something far more grounded and far less performative. It is not measured by how strongly someone feels in moments of closeness, but by how consistently they can remain present when emotional discomfort enters the space. It is revealed in the moments where certainty disappears, expectations rise, and honesty becomes inconvenient. Someone can be deeply affectionate and still emotionally unavailable. They can express warmth, attention, and even attachment. But when the conversation shifts toward clarity, direction, or responsibility, their energy changes. This is because emotional availability is not just about connection, it is about capacity. The capacity to hold truth without escaping it. The capacity to stay engaged when feelings are not easy or convenient. The capacity to remain steady when emotional depth requires definition. What separates emotional availability from emotional inconsistency is not the presence of emotion, but the ability to integrate emotion with clarity. A person who is emotionally available does not rely on ambiguity to maintain connection. They do not need confusion to preserve comfort. Instead, they are willing to acknowledge what is real, even when it feels imperfect or uncertain. They can say, "I care about you," and also be able to explain what that care means in behavior, direction, and consistency. In contrast, emotional unavailability often reveals itself when clarity is required. When asked direct questions, there may be hesitation, avoidance, shifting language, or emotional withdrawal, not necessarily because the person is dishonest, but because clarity demands a level of internal organization they may not have developed. So instead of meeting truth directly, they orbit around it, staying close enough to maintain connection, but far enough to avoid definition. This is why emotional availability cannot be judged only by moments of affection. Affection is easy to express when emotions are light and expectations are low. But emotional availability is tested when depth increases, when conversations require honesty about direction, when vulnerability demands accountability, when connection begins to ask for structure. And this is where consistency becomes the clearest indicator. Not perfection, not certainty, but consistency in emotional presence. The ability to show up in the same emotional truth over time, rather than shifting between closeness and distance based on internal discomfort. Ultimately, emotional availability is not about being perfect in love, it is about being present in truth. It is the willingness to stay engaged with reality, even when reality requires discomfort. And when someone cannot do that consistently, it becomes clear that what is missing is not feeling, but the capacity to sustain feeling within honesty. In the end, the real lesson is not about labeling people, but about protecting your clarity. Love should not require decoding silence, translating mixed signals, or waiting endlessly for emotional certainty that never arrives. The right connection does not fear truth, it responds to it. And when you ask honest questions, you are not trying to control someone's feelings, you are simply refusing to lose yourself in ambiguity. Because emotional peace is not found in intensity, it is found in clarity. So if someone cannot meet you in truth, you do not need to chase harder, you need to choose wiser. Thank you for listening, and may you always have the courage to choose clarity over confusion, and truth over uncertainty.